The late October wind swept across the cemetery in Maplewood, a small town tucked into the hills of rural Oregon. Fallen leaves rustled like old paper across the worn stone paths, spinning and lifting in the breeze before settling at the base of the ancient oak tree that stood watch over the graves. Beneath that tree, huddled in a threadbare coat, sat a girl no older than 10. Her name was Emily Grace Thompson, and she hadn't spoken to another human being in nearly 5 days. She sat cross-legged in the cold earth, her back against the rough bark of the oak, staring blankly at 2 simple gravestones. One bore her father's name, Jonathan Edward Thompson, and the other her mother's, Lily Marie Thompson. They had died 6 months earlier in a car accident on the way home from a camping trip. Emily had survived. Sometimes, she wished she hadn't. The wind picked up, blowing her tangled hair across her face. She didn't move. Her small hands clutched a faded photograph, edges worn, the image soft with age. It was the 3 of them, her parents and her, smiling on the front porch of the home they'd once lived in on the other side of town. The home had been sold. The furniture given away. And Emily had become the state's problem. For a while, she had been placed in a foster home in Eugene. It was clean, the people weren't cruel, but it wasn't home. The other kids teased her for being quiet. Her foster mother scolded her for daydreaming too much. No one asked about the nightmares. No one cared that she cried every night into her pillow. So Emily had run. She took only what she could carry in a small backpack, an extra shirt, the photograph, a spiral notebook, and a pen her mother once gave her with tiny pink roses printed on the barrel. She walked for hours, caught a ride with a kind trucker who didn't ask questions, and made her way back to Maplewood. She had nowhere to go. No one lived. But the cemetery was free. And the oak tree, at least, didn't expect her to talk. Now, 5 days in, she was starving. The crackers she had stolen from the gas station had run out. Her stomach growled, and her limbs felt heavy. Her breath came in slow, uneven puffs. She leaned her head against the gravestone marked Lily Marie Thompson and whispered, "I miss you. I'm trying, okay? But I don't think I can keep doing this." Her eyelids drooped. The wind no longer made her shiver. It was strange, how warmth could come at the worst possible time. From the dirt path at the edge of the cemetery, a man approached. His steps were slow but sure, boots scuffing the stone. He wore a thick flannel shirt, faded jeans, and a wool cap pulled low over silver hair. His name was Walter Grant, and he walked this path every morning as he had for the past 20 years, ever since his wife Martha had been buried beneath the second oak tree on the hill. He didn't expect to see a child. At first, he thought she was a pile of old clothes. Then he noticed the small shoes, the pale hand clutching something tight to her chest. "Hey there," he called gently, not wanting to scare her. Emily didn't respond. He stepped closer, squatted beside her, and saw how pale her face had become, how hollow her cheeks looked. He touched her shoulder lightly. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" She stirred, barely. "Walter Kirstander is brise." "You're freezing," he murmured, shrugging off his coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. "We need to get you inside." He tried to lift her. She was as light as a sack of flour. She whimpered softly but didn't resist. Walter carried her down the path, across the cemetery gates, and into his old Ford truck. It groaned as he turned the ignition, and the heater sputtered to life. He cranked it up, casting glances at the small girl now curled on his passenger seat, coat draped around her like a blanket. "You're going to be okay," he said, though mostly to himself. His home sat on a quiet stretch of land just outside town, a modest farmhouse with chipped paint and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. He hadn't brought anyone there in years. The last visitor had been his son Mark, and that visit hadn't ended well. Walter carried Emily inside, laid her on the couch, and tucked another quilt over her. She didn't wake. In the kitchen, he moved like muscle memory. Pot on the stove. Chicken broth, carrots, rice. His Martha's recipe. As it simmered, he picked up the phone, staring at it for a long time before setting it back down. He didn't call the police. He didn't call social services. Something told him, maybe it was her face, so small and desperate, that she didn't need to be taken away again. Not yet. An hour later, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confused. She bolted upright, the quilt falling from her lap. "It's okay," Walter said softly, approaching with a bowl of steaming soup. "You're safe." Emily stared at him, unsure. Her voice came out dry and cracked.
Où are you?
"Walter," he said simply. "I found you up at the cemetery. Thought you could use a warm place to rest." She looked down at the soup. Her hands shook as she reached for the bowl. Walter didn't stop her. She ate slowly at first, then hungrily.
You've been out there long?
She nodded.
No one is looking for you.
A pause. Then, she shook her head. Walter sat beside her, far enough to give her space. "You can stay the night," he said after a moment. "I won't ask questions. But you'll need a name." She hesitated. Then, voice almost a whisper, she replied. "Emily."
Emily Grace.
He smiled faintly. "Well then, Miss Emily Grace, welcome." She looked at him, eyes wide. For the first time in months, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not safety, not yet. But maybe, the possibility of it. Outside, the wind rustled the oak leaves in the distance. Somewhere, a door had cracked open, quietly, but enough to let in the light. Emily woke to the faint smell of wood smoke and something warm, maybe cinnamon or rosemary. Morning sunlight crept gently across the old couch where she had fallen asleep, casting soft golden light on the frayed rug and the dusty shelves that lined the living room. She blinked up at the ceiling, disoriented for a moment. It wasn't a white plastered wall with a flickering fluorescent bulb, like at the foster center. It wasn't the forest floor or the cold marble of the cemetery. It was warm. It smelled like someone lived here.
A creaking sound made her stiffen.
She sat up quickly, heart pounding. The man Walter, she remembered, stepped into the room, holding a steaming mug. "Morning," he said. "Brought you some tea."
Chamomile.
"My wife used to swear by it." She eyed the mug but didn't reach for it. "I didn't put anything strange in it," he added, a half-smile tugging at his weathered face.
Juste herbe and nez.
"You can smell it if you like." She hesitated, then slowly took the mug, holding it in both hands. It was warm, and the steam curled into her face like a whisper. She didn't drink, but she didn't set it down either. Walter sat in the old armchair across from her. It groaned slightly under his weight. "So," he said after a few moments of silence, "Emily Grace." She nodded cautiously. "That's a good name. Strong. Grace was my wife's middle name too." Her fingers tightened slightly on the mug.
You got someone I should call? Someone was looking for you.
Emily looked down at her knees. "No," she said quietly.
No relative?
"Friends." She shook her head.
Walter exhaled slowly.
He studied the girl in front of him, skinny as a rail, eyes too big for her face, and a wariness in her posture that no child should have to carry. It reminded him too much of someone he'd once known, himself. "I'm not gonna force you to tell me anything," he said. "But it might help, you know."
Just to talk. Emily said nothing.
Her fingers wrapped more tightly around the mug. "I used to be a teacher," he continued.
High school English.
"Back when my knees still worked and I had more hair. Taught for 30 years.
Got pretty good at listening." Emily glanced up.
Something about that word teacher made her shoulders ease a little.
Walter rose slowly, joint cracking.
"Well, whenever you're ready, you can talk. Or not. For now, how about some breakfast?" "I'm not hungry," she said, though her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. Walter chuckled.
That is all right.
"I made eggs and toast anyway. You don't have to eat if you don't want to. But if you change your mind." He left the door open as he returned to the kitchen.
Emily sat there for a long moment.
Then slowly, as if walking across a frozen pond, she followed the smell into the next room. The kitchen was old but clean. Wooden cabinets, hand-stitched curtains, and a fridge covered in faded magnets and notes. A plate was already set at the table, beside a glass of orange juice and a napkin folded neatly. Emily slid into the chair. "You like scrambled or over-easy?" Walter asked. She shrugged. "Scrambled it is." He moved around the kitchen like someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Eggs into a bowl, whisk, pan sizzling with butter.
The rhythm of domestic life.
Emily watched him with quiet eyes. "Do you live here alone?" she asked softly. "I do," Walter replied. Been that way a long time. No kids. He paused. I had a son. Mark. Haven't seen him in years. Why? Walter plated the eggs and toast, setting the dish in front of her before sitting down with his own. Sometimes people drift apart, he said. Sometimes they make choices that lead them down different roads. And sometimes they just stop calling. Emily took a small bite of toast. He didn't like me much once I stopped helping him out, Walter continued. Thought the world owed him something. I figured the best thing I could do was stop giving him what he hadn't earned. Emily swallowed. Do you miss him? Walter didn't answer right away. I miss the boy he used to be. Silence settled over the table again, not awkward but thoughtful. Emily picked at her eggs. Is it okay if I stay, just for a little while? She asked, almost inaudibly. Walter looked up. His gaze was gentle, but firm. You can stay as long as you need, he said. This house has been too quiet for too long. Her shoulders sagged slightly in relief. She nodded and returned to her breakfast, this time taking larger bites. The days that followed passed slowly, but with a quiet rhythm. Emily slept in the guest room, under a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. She helped gather firewood, fed the chickens, and read from the dusty collection of books Walter kept in the living room. They didn't talk much. But they didn't need to. One afternoon, as rain tapped lightly on the window panes, Walter found her at the kitchen table, scribbling furiously in a spiral notebook. You writing? She nodded. What about? Emily hesitated. Just things I remember. Memories. Kind of. Some are real. Some I think I made up so they wouldn't hurt so much. Walter nodded slowly. That's what good writing is sometimes. A way to tell the truth without saying everything. She looked up at him. I used to write stories too, he said. Back when I had the time.
You ever want to read something? You let me know.
I've got a shelf full of dusty old poems in the attic. Emily smiled faintly. Can I read one of yours? She asked. Walter blinked, surprised. Sure. Haven't had anyone ask me that in a while. That night, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Walter read aloud one of his old poems from a yellowing folder. Emily listened, head resting on the armrest, eyes half closed. When he finished, she whispered, It sounds like a hug. He chuckled. That's the nicest thing anyone said about my writing. Emily yawned. I think I'd like to write something that feels like that too. You will, Walter said gently. You already are. As she drifted off to sleep, he tucked the quilt around her. The storm outside pressed against the windows, but inside the little farmhouse, it was warm. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. Walter stood at the entrance of Maplewood Elementary, his hat in his hands, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as he waited outside the principal's office. Emily sat beside him, knees together, backpack on her lap, her fingers fidgeting with the zipper. She hadn't been in a classroom since she ran away from the group home. The thought of fluorescent lights, cold lunch trays, and whispering kids made her stomach twist into knots.
Walter leaned down slightly.
You don't have to do this, not if you're not ready. I want to, Emily whispered.
I just don't know if I remember how to be normal.
He gave a half smile. Normal's overrated. Just then, the office door opened. A tall woman in her 30s stepped out, dressed in a navy cardigan and practical shoes. Her smile was warm, her eyes clear. You must be Emily, she said, extending her hand.
I'm Miss Carter. I'll be your teacher.
Emily stood, shook the woman's hand lightly, and mumbled a quiet hello. Ms. Carter turned to Walter. Mr. Grant, thank you for coming in. We'll get everything settled. Walter nodded.
I'll be back at 3.
He glanced at Emily.
You'll be all right. You're stronger than you think.
And with that, he turned and left. Emily's new classroom was bright and filled with posters of reading goals and motivational quotes. The desks were arranged in groups of 4. As Ms. Carter led her in, 20 sets of eyes turned toward her like spotlights. Class, Ms. Carter announced, we have a new student joining us today. Her name is Emily Thompson. Some students nodded. A few whispered. A tall girl in the back smirked. Emily didn't look up. You can take a seat next to Olivia, Ms. Carter added, pointing to a desk near the window. Emily moved quietly, slipping into the chair. Olivia, a girl with glasses and a ponytail, offered a polite nod but said nothing. It was enough. The first lesson was math. Emily tried to focus, but the numbers blurred, and the weight of the stares from across the room didn't go away. At recess, she sat alone on a bench near the fence, watching the others play foursquare and tag. No one invited her. No one teased her, either, not yet. But she could feel the wall forming. After lunch, Ms. Carter handed out writing journals. Today, I'd like you to write about a memory, she said. It can be happy, sad, or somewhere in between. Just something you remember clearly. Emily stared down at the blank page. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pencil. She didn't want to write about the accident, or the group home, or being hungry in the woods. So instead, she wrote about the first bowl of soup Walter gave her. It smelled like rosemary and steam. I don't remember if I said thank you, but it was the first time in months that I ate without crying. I didn't know you could taste safety, but you can. It tastes like warmth in a wooden bowl. When Ms. Carter walked past, she paused to glance at Emily's page. She didn't say anything, but when the bell rang, she held Emily back. I read a bit of what you wrote, she said softly. You have a gift, Emily. Not just for words, but for making people feel something. Emily's cheeks flushed. It's just a journal. Sometimes, journals hold the most honest stories. Would you be okay if I read it aloud tomorrow?
You want to say your name.
Emily hesitated, then nodded. The next morning, Ms. Carter stood at the front of the room with a sheet of paper in her hand. I'd like to start with something one of you wrote yesterday, she said. It's a short piece, but I think it says more than a whole chapter. She read Emily's paragraph aloud, word for word. When she finished, the room was silent. A boy in the second row raised his hand. That made me kind of hungry. Laughter bubbled up, but not unkindly. Another girl added, it made me feel sad, but also warm. Ms. Carter smiled. Good writing does that. It brings us into someone else's world. Emily sat very still, heart racing. No one pointed at her.
No one whispered.
But a girl in front of her turned and offered a quiet thumbs up. Olivia smiled. At lunch, Emily sat in the same spot by the fence. This time, two kids came and sat nearby. One asked her what her favorite book was. She said Charlotte's Web. He said his was Holes. They argued gently over which was better. It was the first real conversation she'd had with someone her age in over a year. When Walter picked her up that afternoon, he asked, "How was it?" Emily looked out the window for a moment, then said, "No one called me weird." Walter raised an eyebrow. "That's your bar for success?" She smiled faintly. "It's higher than yesterday." He chuckled. "Well then, we'll call that progress." Back home, Emily did her homework at the kitchen table while Walter made dinner. Afterward, she helped wash dishes, something she hadn't done in ages but remembered how to do. Before bed, she took her spiral notebook and wrote down 3 things. 1. I survived the first day. 2. Ms. Carter said I'm a writer.
3. Someone sat next to me at lunch.
She stared at the list for a long time before flipping to a fresh page and writing one more sentence. Maybe I don't have to disappear anymore. Walter Grant hadn't spoken to his son in nearly 6 years. He didn't even know where Mark lived anymore, or whether he was still running the startup company he had left Maplewood to pursue. All he had was an old number, scribbled on a post-it note now yellowing on the edge of his fridge. It had been there for years, untouched, a ghost of a relationship he didn't know how to mourn or repair. But that morning, as Walter stood in the yard with a rake in his hands and watched Emily toss handfuls of orange leaves into the air like confetti, a black SUV pulled up the gravel road. It stopped in front of the gate. The door opened. Mark. Still tall, still broad-shouldered, though a little thinner than Walter remembered. Dressed in a crisp jacket and jeans too clean for the country. He took off his sunglasses and looked straight at his father. Walter's hands tightened around the rake. Well, he muttered. So the dead do rise. Mark looked at Emily, then back at Walter. Didn't expect to find you running a daycare, he said.
Emily froze. Walter stepped forward. She's not a daycare. She's my.
She's not your anything, Mark interrupted, voice sharper than necessary. You don't take in stray kids, Dad. Especially not without telling anyone. I didn't realize I had to check in with you on who I invite into my home. Emily stepped back, her face flushed. She felt as if she had wandered into a house not hers again, as if everything she had been building might crumble in seconds.
Mark turned to her. What's your name?
Emily didn't answer. Walter stepped between them.
That's enough.
You don't get to interrogate her.
Mark laughed bitterly.
You don't think this is strange? You, living alone for decades, suddenly deciding to adopt some random girl.
I didn't adopt her, Walter said. She needed a place to stay. She's staying. That's all.
Mark looked around at the modest house, the creaking porch swing, the oak tree in the background. I came here because I heard from someone in town you've been talking to lawyers.
About guardianship. Property.
You planning to give all this to her?
Walter stared at his son.
I'm planning to make sure this land ends up with someone who knows what to do with it. Who won't sell it to a developer the second I'm gone.
Mark's jaw tightened.
You're saying she's more of a grant than I am?
I'm saying she shows up. You didn't.
Emily stood rooted to the spot. The wind picked up, sending leaves tumbling across the gravel.
It all felt too heavy, too sudden.
She took a step back toward the house.
Mark noticed. You know what?
Fine. Keep playing house with your little charity case. But don't come asking me for help when it falls apart. He got into his car, slammed the door, and drove off, wheels spitting gravel behind him.
Silence returned.
Emily stood frozen, her arms wrapped around herself.
Walter turned to her.
I'm sorry you had to see that.
She nodded slowly.
Was that really your son?
He sighed. Yes. Once upon a time.
Emily sat down on the porch steps.
He doesn't like me.
Walter joined her.
He doesn't know you.
But he's your real family. Walter looked at her, his eyes tired but warm. Blood is one kind of family, Emily. It's not the only kind.
She looked down.
If you give everything to me, people will say I stole it.
They'll say I tricked you.
He reached over, gently placing his hand over hers.
Let them talk. I know what's true.
Word spread quickly in a small town. That Walter Grant had taken in a girl was old news, but now whispers started to grow meaner. She's after the old man's land, some said. He's not thinking straight anymore.
Where did she even come from?
At school, the change was subtle. One day, someone left a note on Emily's desk that said Gold Digger's daughter. She crumpled it and said nothing. Olivia asked her what was wrong, and Emily lied.
Just a prank.
But it hurt. More than she admitted. That night, she didn't write in her journal. She just stared at the blank page. Walter noticed her silence at dinner.
Rough day.
She nodded. He waited, then asked gently, Want to talk? Emily hesitated, then whispered, Maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe it's making things worse for you. Walter leaned back in his chair. You know, when Martha, my wife, passed away, this place got very quiet.
Too quiet.
I kept the house clean, the porch painted, but nothing felt alive.
He paused. Then you showed up.
And the place felt like a home again. Emily's eyes shimmered. You didn't ask for anything. You just needed someone to believe you were worth keeping.
And I do.
I believe it with everything I have.
She swallowed.
Even if people talk?
He smiled. Let them talk.
We'll write better stories. The next day at school, Ms. Carter asked the class to write about a person who changed your life. Emily sat with her pencil hovering over the page. She began slowly. He's older than my grandfather should be, but he knows how to make soup when I'm sad. He reads poems out loud like they're promises. He doesn't ask me to be anyone but myself. His porch swing creaks, but it's the safest place I know. I think he saved my life. Ms. Carter paused when she read it after school. She didn't ask who it was about. She didn't have to. That weekend, Walter and Emily sat together under the oak tree, the same one where he had first found her.
The leaves above were turning golden. I think, Walter said, we should talk to that lawyer again. Not just about guardianship, but about something more permanent. Emily looked up. Like adoption? If you'd want that, Walter said, voice low. It's just a piece of paper. But maybe it helps you feel like you belong. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sudden overwhelming feeling of being chosen. I'd like that, she whispered. And so, as the oak tree shed its leaves and the wind shifted toward winter, a new chapter quietly began, one not born of blood or obligation, but of choice, kindness, and the decision to love. The lawyer's office in downtown Maplewood smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Walter sat stiffly in a chair that creaked under his weight, a manila folder resting in his lap. Emily sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to hide the nervous tapping of her fingers. Across the desk sat Rachel Nguyen, a local attorney known for her work with foster care and guardianship cases. She was young, sharp-eyed, and calm in a way that made even Walter feel a little less out of place in a world of paperwork and legalese. So, she said, glancing between them, you're asking to petition for legal guardianship of Miss Emily Thompson? Walter nodded. That's right. And if possible, I want to pursue full adoption as well. Rachel raised an eyebrow. You understand that's a bit unusual, Mr. Grant. At your age. I know how old I am, Walter cut in, not unkindly. But age doesn't disqualify me from loving someone. Emily looked up at him, then quickly back down. Rachel softened. Fair enough. I'll need some documents. Birth certificate, social services history, background checks, home inspection. And Emily, you'll need to speak with a family court representative. Emily swallowed. Like an interview? Yes, Rachel said gently. They'll want to know how you feel about Mr. Grant becoming your legal guardian. Whether you feel safe. If this is what you want. I do, Emily said. I mean, I do want him to be my family. Rachel smiled. Good. That helps a lot. Back home, the next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, signatures, and long conversations about things that Emily had never thought she'd have to answer. Where did she come from? Who had been responsible for her before? Did she remember the accident that took her parents? Sometimes, the questions felt like tiny knives. But each time, Walter was there. Not hovering, not pushing, just present. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult home visit from a state-appointed social worker, Emily curled up in the porch swing and stared at the oak tree. Walter joined her, settling into his old chair. I feel like I'm being inspected, Emily muttered. Like I'm a piece of furniture they're trying to decide whether to keep or throw away. Walter chuckled. You ever try selling an old chair? Emily looked at him, confused. People poke it, shake it, sit on it from every angle. But the good ones? They're solid. Might have a few creaks, a few scuffs, but they hold. That's you, kid. You hold. She smiled despite herself. Besides, he added, I already decided to keep you. The rest of this is just noise. The town, meanwhile, continued to whisper. Some neighbors were supportive. Mrs. Langley, the retired librarian, brought over homemade peach cobbler and told Emily she used to know her mother. You have Lily's eyes, she said. And a kind heart like hers, too. Others were less kind. A man at the hardware store muttered something about attention-seeking orphans, loud enough for Walter to hear. Walter didn't respond. He simply paid for the nails and walked out, Emily beside him, her chin held high. But it hurt. Do you think they're right? Emily asked as they got into the truck. About what? That I don't belong. Walter turned to her, voice steady. I think people fear what they don't understand. And you, Emily Grace, are someone they've never had the privilege of knowing. Winter approached. The adoption process dragged on, slowed by bureaucracy and backlog. But amidst the waiting, life continued. Emily returned to school each day with growing confidence. Her journal entries were no longer short and guarded but expansive, honest. She began staying after class to help Ms. Carter with bulletin boards and reading to the younger kids during library hour. One day, Olivia invited her to a sleepover. Emily nearly cried. At home, she began writing a new story. Not about orphans or accidents,
but about a girl who finds a house made of books and a man who teaches her how to read dreams. Walter read every chapter as she wrote them, always leaving comments in the margins like "brilliant" or "I want more here." "You're turning into quite the author," he said one night as they sipped cocoa by the fire.
Emily smiled. "Maybe someday I'll write about us." He nodded. "Just make sure you get my good side."
Then, one crisp January morning, the envelope came. Rachel had called the day before, warning them that a decision was near, but holding it in her hands made it real.
Walter handed it to Emily. "You should open it," he said.
She tore the seal slowly, carefully unfolding the pages.
Her eyes scanned the lines. A pause. Then a smile. "It's approved," she whispered.
Walter let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding.
"Well then," he said softly, "I guess it's official." Emily read the document again. Her name was listed clearly, Emily Grace Grant.
"I have a last name again," she said, voice trembling.
Walter put his hand on her shoulder. "No," he said. "You have a family again."
They celebrated with a small dinner. Ms. Carter stopped by with a card signed by the whole class. Olivia gave her a handmade bracelet.
Mrs. Langley baked another pie. Walter, in his usual style, kept it quiet.
But he added one new photo to the wall that night, a picture of him and Emily on the porch swing, the oak tree behind them. As the fire crackled and snow began to fall lightly outside, Emily sat by the window and opened her journal to a fresh page.
She wrote, "Today, I stopped being nobody. Today, I became a Grant. And tomorrow, I think I'll start writing the first chapter of something new."
Emily Grant was 13 the first time her story was read aloud in a room full of strangers. It happened in the Maplewood Public Library on a chilly Saturday afternoon, during the town's annual Young Writers Showcase. Her teacher, Ms. Carter, had quietly submitted Emily's story to the panel without telling her. When Emily found out, her heart thudded like it had when she stood in front of the class for the first time.
Walter offered to read it for her. But Emily shook her head. "I think I need to be the one to tell it."
So there she stood, slightly too short for the podium, her hands gripping the sides of the printed page. The story was called The House with the Swinging Gate, a tale about a girl who stumbled into a garden where the trees whispered and the gate never stayed shut, because some places were always meant to be returned to.
When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then came the applause. Not polite, not obligatory, but full. Walter stood at the back, leaning on his cane now. His smile was quiet, his eyes glassy with pride. He didn't need to say anything. She saw everything in the way he looked at her. From that day forward, Emily became known as the girl who writes. The library asked if she'd be interested in starting a writing group for other students. She said yes. They met on Wednesday afternoons, 5 kids at first, then 10, then 15. They called it the Oak Tree Club, after the one that stood tall outside Walter's house, the one Emily always talked about. She taught the others how to start with memory, how to take something painful and turn it into a page that no longer cut to the touch. They wrote about loss, about fear, but also about video games, birthday cakes, and what it would feel like to fly. One day, a boy named Eli stayed behind after the group. "My mom and dad fight a lot," he said. "Writing about it helps, but I don't know. Is it okay to be mad and still love them?" Emily didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. "Sometimes love and anger live in the same house. That doesn't make either of them less real." He nodded, and left with a small smile. That night, Emily sat on the porch swing with Walter. "I think I understand what you meant," she said. "About what?" "When you said I gave this house life again. I feel like that's what I get to do now. For other people." Walter chuckled. "Told you. You're turning into a dangerous little thing." "How so?" "You're making people feel. That kind of power is rare." As Emily grew, so did her words. She started submitting stories to teen writing contests. Some she won, others she didn't. But she kept writing. Walter, now in his 70s, began to slow down. He walked less, rested more. The cane became a necessity, not just a habit. Emily noticed but didn't mention it. Neither did he. One afternoon, while sorting through a box in the attic, Emily found an old collection of letters wrapped in ribbon. They were addressed to Martha Grant. Most of them were love letters, some short, some poetic,
all written in Walter's uneven but unmistakable handwriting. She brought them down and laid them out on the table.
"Did you ever send these?" she asked gently. Walter smiled. "Every single one. But she liked to keep them.
Said it reminded her that even after we married, I still pursued her."
Emily touched the paper, yellowed and soft. "They're beautiful." "They're true," he said. She looked up at him.
"Do you think I could ever write something that lasts that long?"
He reached out, placed a hand on hers. "You already have."
Later that year, a reporter from a regional newspaper came to Maplewood to write a piece on local youth programs. She attended one of Emily's writing group sessions, read some of their work, and ended up interviewing both Emily and Walter for the feature. A week later, the article appeared under the title, "Girl Beneath the Oak Tree Builds a Forest of Stories." The piece went semi-viral online, and emails began arriving from nearby towns. Schools, libraries, even a juvenile detention center wanted to know, could Emily bring her program to them?
She looked at Walter. "I don't want to leave," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "You just have to plant more trees."
So she started branching out, weekend workshops, Zoom sessions for rural schools, submissions to anthologies.
Her stories weren't flashy or dramatic.
They were quiet, tender, and raw in a way people didn't expect from someone so young.
But they listened. Because they could feel it.
That fall, Emily sat at the kitchen table filling out scholarship applications. One in particular stood out, the Pacific Northwest Youth Author Grant. She worked on the essay for days, asking Walter to read drafts, offer notes, cross out clichés. On the final night before submission, she sat with her laptop open, staring at the blinking cursor.
"What do I write for? Why I write?" she asked. Walter took a slow breath. "Because someone once made room for you. And now, you're doing the same." She paused, then began typing. "I write because someone let me stay before I had anything to give. I write because stories saved me before people did. I write because the house with the swinging gate was never just a place, it was a promise. That kindness can come quietly. That home can be built with words." She submitted it that night. Weeks passed. Fall turned to early winter. Maplewood prepared for the holiday season. The oak tree dropped the last of its leaves, and Walter spent more time indoors. One night, as the wind howled outside, he handed Emily a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. "I meant to give this to you on your birthday," he said. "But I think you're ready now." Inside was a fountain pen, deep mahogany, the initials EGG engraved near the clip. Emily blinked. "You added the second G." Walter nodded. "It fits you better now." She hugged him, longer than usual. And in the quiet of that night, with a fire warming the walls and snow beginning to fall outside, Emily wrote the first line of her new story. Not because she had to, but because the words were no longer just her own. They were for every child still waiting beneath their own oak tree. The day the letter came, Emily was standing under the oak tree, notebook in one hand, pencil in the other, trying to find the right ending to her latest story. She often wrote outside now. The house had become a space of memory and ritual, but that tree had become her anchor. Walter opened the mailbox like he did every morning, but today, his voice carried louder than usual when he called out from the porch. "Emily, you've got something. From the foundation." She rushed to him, heart skipping. The envelope bore the seal of the Pacific Northwest Youth Author Grant. Her name, Emily Grace Grant, was printed in bold, elegant font across the front. She opened it carefully, unfolding the letter inside. "Congratulations. You have been selected as the 2024 recipient of the PNW Youth Author Grant. Your work displays rare emotional clarity, maturity, and a voice that speaks with grace and strength far beyond your years." Emily stood frozen for a beat, then burst into a grin that stretched until her eyes glistened. "I got it," she whispered. Walter smiled, broad and proud. "Of course you did." She didn't cry until later that night, when she sat alone in her room, rereading the letter over and over. The news spread fast. The local newspaper did a full-page feature. The mayor invited her to a city council meeting to honor her. Teachers from other districts emailed asking for advice on starting youth writing clubs. One small publishing house even reached out, interested in developing her short stories into a collection.
Walter watched all of this unfold like a man watching spring arrive after a long, hard winter.
Quietly pleased. Always in the background. But Emily noticed something else too. He coughed more often now. Winced when he stood. His steps were slower, more deliberate.
He spent longer in the rocking chair, and sometimes he fell asleep with a book open on his chest, glasses slipping down his nose.
One evening, while helping him into bed, she asked gently, "Have you seen the doctor lately?" Walter gave a non-committal shrug. "Nothing, a warm blanket and some rest won't fix." But Emily wasn't a child anymore. She knew deflection when she heard it. She didn't press though. Not yet. Instead, she wrote more.
She began collecting her stories into a manuscript, 13 in total, each one loosely inspired by the kids she mentored, the town of Maplewood, and of course Walter.
She titled the collection Letters from the Swing.
Rachel Nguyen, their family friend and lawyer, helped her find a literary agent.
"You're a grant now," Rachel said with a smile. "Might as well keep breaking expectations." The manuscript was picked up within 3 months. Emily was 16. Publication day came in early spring.
The first copies arrived in brown boxes at the house, the pages still smelling faintly of fresh ink and promise. Emily opened one slowly, hands trembling, then ran her fingers along the spine of her own name on the cover.
Letters from the Swing, by Emily Grace Grant.
Walter held the book in his hands like it was made of porcelain. He didn't say much. Just nodded once and said, "You did it, kid."
They sat on the porch swing that evening, reading passages aloud under the budding branches of the oak.
At one point, Walter chuckled and pointed to a paragraph. "I remember this one," he said. "I didn't know you noticed that I burned the biscuits." "I notice everything," Emily replied, smiling. They were quiet for a while after that. Then Walter said, more softly than usual, "I think it's time I see that doctor." Emily didn't speak.
She just nodded, swallowed the lump in her throat, and reached for his hand. The diagnosis wasn't unexpected, but it still felt like a punch.
Congestive at fêlure.
Age-related. Manageable, for a while.
He could stay at home, the doctor said, with monitoring, rest, and care.
But it would progress. Gradually. Inevitably.
Back at the house, Walter sat on the porch, wrapped in his wool blanket.
Emily brewed tea and joined him. "You scared?" she asked.
"A little," he admitted. "Not of the end. Just of what you'll leave behind."
"You'll leave everything," she said, her voice tight. "You'll leave me." He turned his head toward her, face weathered but kind. "And I'll be proud of what I left." They didn't talk much more that night. They didn't need to. Emily adjusted her life without complaint.
She declined a few speaking engagements, rearranged her writing schedule, and quietly took over the household tasks.
She brought home books from the library about elder care. She called Rachel to help draft medical directives. She made sure the woodpile was stacked high before the cold returned. But she never treated Walter like a burden. And Walter never allowed himself to become one. They kept their routine as best they could. She still held writing club on Wednesdays. He still read her drafts.
They still sat under the oak tree when the weather allowed, and on quiet nights, he'd still ask her to read aloud from her stories.
"Your words are getting sharper," he said one evening. "Sharper.
Like an arrow.
You've always had the heart.
Now you've got the M." Emily Logued.
Coming from a retired English teacher, I'll take that. "You better," he said with a wink. "I won't be around forever to give reviews." She looked at him then. Really looked. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything."
"Don't go before you write the last story."
Walter didn't ask what that meant.
He just said deal.
And as the wind rustled through the new leaves of the oak tree above them, they sat together in a silence so full of meaning that no page could contain it.
It came on a rainy Tuesday in May.
Emily was reviewing a batch of student submissions from her writing club when the email arrived, hidden between a newsletter and a spam message about online discounts.
She almost deleted it without reading. But the subject line caught her eye.
Residency invitation, Creative Writing Fellowship at Columbia University.
She blinked. Opened it.
Read the word slowly. Dear MS Grant.
We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as one of 4 national fellows for the Columbia University Creative Writing Residency Program.
Her breath caught. It wasn't just a scholarship.
It was a full-year fellowship in New York City, housing, stipend, mentorship from published authors, connections in the literary world. It was the kind of opportunity that transformed careers, the kind that opened doors for young writers destined for national shelves and bestseller lists.
Emily sat back, the room suddenly quiet around her.
Outside, the rain beat steadily against the window pane.
The oak tree swayed in the wind like it too was waiting for her response. That evening, she placed the printed letter on the dining table as Walter stirred a pot of soup in the kitchen.
"What's that?" he asked. She hesitated. "An offer. From Columbia. In New York." He turned slowly, raising an eyebrow.
Columbia? Ivy League Columbia?
She nodded.
He wiped his hands on a dish towel, came to sit down, and picked up the letter.
He read it once. Then again. When he looked up, he was smiling.
"Emily Grace Grant," he said softly, "you've made it."
She forced a smile. "It's not official until I say yes."
"Well, are you going to?"
She didn't answer.
He set the paper down gently.
"You're worried about leaving."
"I don't want to go if it means leaving you behind."
Walter chuckled.
"Kid, I've been left behind by plenty of people in my life. But none of them ever looked back the way you do."
She frowned. "This is different." "I know," he said. "That's why you have to go." She stared at him, eyes glistening.
"But what if something happens while I'm gone?" He took her hand, his fingers thinner now, skin more fragile, but the grip was steady.
"Then you'll come back. That's what family does."
For days, she didn't answer the email. She went about her routine, writing club, school visits, cooking, laundry, but her thoughts were always somewhere else. She woke up in the middle of the night imagining subways and strangers, imagining Walter sitting alone on the porch with the oak tree behind him and no one to read aloud to. One night, she found him asleep in his chair, a book half open on his chest.
His breathing was shallow, rhythmic, but weak.
She covered him with a blanket, then stood by the fireplace, unsure if she was watching a moment or a memory. The next morning, Walter brought it up again. "You're not doing either of us any good by hovering," he said, sipping his tea. "If you stay just because I'm getting older, I'll never forgive you."
"I'm not staying for you," she replied. "I'm staying for me. For everything we built."
Walter gave her a look. "Emily, we didn't build this so you could stay."
She looked away.
"I want you to have something that doesn't depend on me being here," he said.
You gave me life again.
You gave me a granddaughter.
Now let me give you your future. She blinked back the tears.
"You already did.
Then go write the next chapter." She accepted the offer a week later. The response from the program coordinator was immediate and enthusiastic. They would send materials, orientation details, housing arrangements. She was expected in New York by late August. That gave her 3 months. 3 months to prepare. 3 months to say goodbye. She spent that summer savoring everything. She read aloud to Walter in the evenings, even when he dozed off halfway through. They cooked together, worked through old recipes from Martha's handwritten cookbook. They listened to jazz on the porch while the oak tree whispered above them. She taught her last sessions at the writing club and trained Olivia, now a confident 16-year-old, to take over. "You're the only one who gets how this place works," Emily said.
"You've got the same fire."
Olivia Hugheder.
"You're not really leaving forever, are you?"
Emily smiled. "I'll visit. I'll always come back."
Still, as her departure neared, a quiet weight grew heavier in her chest.
It wasn't regret.
Not quite fear either. It was something softer, like carrying a photograph too close to your heart. One evening, near the end of July, she and Walter sat under the oak tree. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the field.
Walter's voice was low.
"When I was your age, I wanted to be a poet." Emily glanced at him.
"You were." "I was a teacher. I read poetry.
But I never wrote it the way you do.
Never chased it.
I told myself there wasn't time." He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't do what I did. Don't talk yourself out of the life you want." She took his hand,
pressing it to her cheek. I won't.
Her last night in Maplewood, the house was filled with visitors.
Rachel came. Ms. Carter too.
Students from the Oak Tree Club brought her letters, cookies, and handmade bookmarks. Even people who had once whispered behind her back now shook her hand and said, "We always knew you were something special." She smiled politely, hugged each of them, but her eyes searched for Walter constantly.
He was there, of course.
Watching from the corner, glass of lemonade in hand.
That night, when the house grew quiet, he handed her a sealed envelope.
I wrote this in case you get homesick, he said. Emily took it. Can I open it now? He shook his head. Wait until you're in New York.
Maybe your first night there.
She nodded, then wrapped her arms around him, breathing in the scent of wood, paper, and something uniquely him.
I'm scared, she admitted. I was too, he whispered. The first time I let someone in.
They stood like that for a long time. Then Emily said the words she'd waited years to say.
Good night, Grandpa.
And Walter, her Walter, smiled like he'd been waiting just as long.
Good night, kiddo.
New York was louder than Emily expected.
Subway roared like rivers beneath the street.
Crowds moved in waves, faces unfamiliar, expressions unreadable. The campus was a maze of stone buildings and towering trees she didn't recognize. For the first few days, she floated through orientation like a visitor in someone else's dream.
She missed the quiet of Maplewood.
The creak of the porch swing. The way the wind sifted through the oak leaf like finger running through air.
Her roommates were friendly enough. One liked jazz. One liked plants.
One never spoke unless spoken to.
Emily mostly kept to herself.
She wrote late at night, by lamplight, when the city hummed just softly enough to resemble silence.
On her third night, she remembered the letter.
Walter had given it to her the night before she left, instructing her to open it when she felt far from home. She sat on her bed, knees tucked under her, and opened the envelope.
Inside was a single handwritten page. Dear Emily,
if you're reading this, it means you made it. You stepped into the bigger world you were always meant for. And though I'm not there to see it in person, believe me, I'm smiling. You've always been the kind of person who carries light. You carried it into my home when I didn't know I needed it.
You carried it into this town. Into every kid you taught.
And now, you'll carry it even farther.
You want you to remember something. Au maison ta place you stay.
It's a place you carry.
It grows with you, inside you. It way for you. Like a porch light lefton.
Live boldly.
Love deeply.
Write honestly.
And if you ever feel lost, just listen for the wind in the trees. You'll be there. With love, always. Grandpa Walter. Emilie's vision blue red.
Her breath caught.
She folded the letter slowly, as if creases might tear the ink. She cried that night, not from sadness alone, but from the ache of growing. From the impossible love of someone who had once been a stranger, but now lived in her marrow.
Classes began. Her professors praised her insight, her voice.
They spoke of publishing, of agents, of opportunities.
Emily took notes. Smiled.
But her heart lingered on the last line of the letter.
You'll be there.
2 weeks passed.
Then came the phone call.
Rachel.
She answered on the second ring, stepping out into the hallway of the dorm.
Emily, Rachel said softly, I'm so sorry to call you like this.
Emily's heart sank before the words arrived.
He passed away this morning. Everything stopped. The hallway faded.
The world folded in on itself.
Walter. Her Walter. Gone.
The train ride back to Maplewood felt longer than it was. The trees outside were turning already, a mosaic of gold and rust, as if the earth itself were bowing its head.
Rachel met her at the station. No words were needed.
Emily gripped the letter in her coat pocket like a talisman. The house smelled the same. Wood and thyme and something sweet in the corners.
The bed was made. The chair was empty.
On the table, a stack of papers lay neatly clipped, a medical directive, a will, a note addressed to her.
She would read it later. First, she sat under the oak tree.
The swing moved in the breeze.
Not fast.
Just enough to remind her of evenings spent with stories and cocoa and silence filled with presents.
She sat there for hours.
The funeral was simple, just as Walter had wished.
Pin casquet.
Local church. Ms. Carter gave a reading. Olivia, now leading the Oak Tree Club, read one of Emily's earliest poems aloud. Rachel handed Emily the eulogy Walter had written years before, in a file labeled "just in case." But Emily folded it back and placed it over his chest. "I'll say my own," she whispered. Standing before the small gathering, she held Walter's favorite book in her hand, a worn volume of Robert Frost. "He once told me," Emily began, "that the best stories aren't the ones we read.
They're the ones we live, and the ones we leave behind."
She looked at the people in the pews.
Familiar face.
Faces Walter had helped, listened to, welcomed. "He gave me more than a home. He gave me a name, a story, and a belief that love isn't owed, it's chosen." Her voice shook, but she continued. "If you ever sat on his porch, drank his tea, heard his poems, you know what I mean." She held up the book. "And if you didn't, read this.
Or listen to the wind in the trees."
He's still here." In the days that followed, Emily stayed at the house. She didn't rush back to New York. Her professors understood.
Her program advisor extended her deadline.
She walked the property, sat in Walter's chair, revisited every drawer, every letter, every whisper of a life spent simply but completely. In a folder labeled Legacy, she found a document naming her the sole heir, not just to the house, but to the land, the rights, the royalties from her published book. Walter had set it all up months before. Quietly, purposefully. Rachel explained the details. Emily nodded through the tears. On the back of the document, written in Walter's shaky handwriting, were just 4 words.
Keep the gate open.
Emily stayed through the season. She reopened the Oak Tree Club. She led workshops at the school, at the library, at the town center. She invited kids from other towns. Kids who had lost parents. Kids who had been left behind. Kids who didn't yet know they mattered. She sat beside them and said, "Tell me your story." And when they hesitated, she added, "I'll go first." One night, as autumn tipped into winter, Emily sat on the porch swing. A small child from the writing club sat beside her, quiet, unsure. "Do you think people can still hear us after they're gone?" the child asked. Emily looked up at the stars. "I think some of them never really leave." The child smiled.
Like your grandpa.
Emily nodded. Exactly like that. And in the hush that followed, a gust of wind moved through the oak branches above them, soft, steady, unmistakable. Winter passed, and with the first thaw of spring, Emily returned to New York. She packed her journals, Walter's letter, and a handful of oak leaves she had pressed between the pages of his favorite poetry book. They weren't perfect. Some were torn at the edges, brittle, but they carried the shape of home. Back at Columbia, she walked the same halls with a different kind of weight in her step, not heavy, but rooted. Her professors said her writing had changed. It was quieter now, sharper. Like it had been sifted through grief and returned distilled. Her classmates noticed, too. One of them, a tall boy from Chicago, said, "It feels like you're not just writing for you anymore." She wasn't. Her stories now carried the memory of a man who never asked for recognition, who believed in porch lights, soup on hard days, and the power of listening without interruption. In April, her second manuscript was accepted by the same publisher who had championed her first. This one was different, part memoir, part guidebook for young writers. It was titled Keep the Gate Open. It became her quiet anthem. That summer, Emily moved back to Maplewood, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She split her time between the 2 coasts, teaching creative writing at workshops in the city and mentoring rural youth at home. The house Walter left her became a sanctuary, a retreat space for young storytellers and artists who needed more than instruction. They needed space. Air. Soil. Trust. She called it the Swinging Gate Writer's House. At the center of it stood the same old oak tree. Weathered. Massive.
Familiar.
She installed a new bench beneath it, engraved with a single line from Walter's letter. "Home is the place you carry." And below it,
In memory of Walter Grant, who never closed the door.
5 years later, Emily stood on the TEDx stage in Portland, Oregon. The lights were warm on her face. In the audience were librarians, teachers, students, editors, strangers. She wore a simple dress, a small oak leaf pin on her collar.
My name is Emily Grace Grant, she began, and I believe stories can save lives.
She spoke for 17 minutes. Not about fame. Not about success.
But about a porch swing, a bowl of soup, and a man who taught her that being chosen once was enough to rewrite everything.
The video went viral in a quiet way. Not explosive, but steady.
It found its way into high school classrooms, community centers, trauma groups.
People emailed to say, "Thank you. That's my story too."
One afternoon, she received a letter from a girl named Cassidy in Nebraska.
Cassidy was 12. Her dad was in prison. Her mom worked 3 jobs.
Cassidy didn't have many friends, but she had found letters from the swing in the school library.
She wrote,
"When I read about the porch and the oak tree, I cried because I didn't think places like that were real.
But now I want to make one. Even if it's just in my backyard." Emily wrote back,
"You don't need a tree.
Just a notebook and someone to share it with. That's where home begins." Time passed. Seasons cycled.
The house remained steady and warm, even as the world outside spun faster.
Olivia took over the local library.
Eli, the boy who once asked if love and anger could live in the same house, became a high school counselor.
Every fall, they returned to the oak tree with their students. Every spring, Emily hosted a festival. It wasn't flashy. No stage.
No big sponsor. Just stories. Children reading aloud.
Teenagers showing poems taped to cardboard. Elders reciting memories. A long table filled with soup, baked bread, tea. People stayed late, even when it rained.
On the 20th anniversary of the Oak Tree Club, someone asked Emily if she ever wished for something bigger.
A foundation.
A brand.
National riche.
Emily just smiled and said, "We're already bigger than we look." Years later, Emily stood beside the grave of Walter Grant, a bouquet of white wildflowers in her hand.
The oak tree loomed tall beside the hill, as if watching.
She knelt down, brushing leaf from the stone.
"Guess what?" she whispered. "They're turning the oak tree curriculum into a statewide program. It's going to be taught in over 100 schools." She placed the flowers gently.
Is you right every day?
"Just like you said. I still read your poems when I miss you."
Her voice cracked.
She smiled through it. "And yes, the gate is still open."
That night, back at the house, Emily sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea. The wind whispered in the branches above, the same song it had always sung.
Inside, a dozen students slept in bunks. Some had been through things Emily couldn't name. Others just needed to be seen. All of them had stories. The light in the window burned gently. On her lap rested a fresh journal. She opened to the first page. Wrote,
"Once, there was a girl who sat under a tree and didn't know if she'd ever be found.
But someone found her. And she never forgot how it felt to be chosen. So she built a forest.
And outside, as the stars bloomed one by one, the oak tree swayed and listened.
Still standing. Still sheltering.
Still home."